Poor quadruplet sisters sell flowers on the street on a rainy day. When a young billionaire approaches, one of them says, crying, "Please, sir, we just want to buy medicine for our mom." When he looks at them, he realizes they are identical to his ex-wife, and he's stunned. The rain fell relentlessly over Edinburgh that autumn afternoon. The sky, heavy with dark clouds, turned the middle of the afternoon into early evening. Ian Matthews walked with his gaze fixed on the wet ground, counting the steps to his empty apartment. 227. Always the same number, always the same route, always the same loneliness waiting for him at the end of the journey. The cathedral clock chimed 4 times when he left the architecture office. Another project delivered, another day done, another purposeless night ahead. A perfect routine for not thinking about what he had lost 6 years ago. The city centre streets were almost deserted, with only a few tourists running from one shop to another, trying to escape the rain that showed no sign of stopping. Ian followed his usual path, shoulders hunched, less to protect himself from the rain, and more from the invisible weight he had carried for so long. The wind changed direction, blowing the rain straight into his face. Ian lifted his gaze for a moment, and that's when he saw her, a small figure in a red coat, standing under the narrow awning of a closed shop. A child. Alone in the storm. Ian hesitated. He wasn't one to meddle in other people's lives. The years had taught him to keep his distance, not to get involved, but something about that solitary figure made him stop. The girl held a small bouquet of wildflowers, wrapped in newspaper already soaked through. When she noticed Ian approaching, she straightened up and forced a smile. "Flowers, sir. Only £3 for the bouquet." Her voice was soft, almost lost in the din of the rain. Ian stopped a few steps away, intrigued by the little seller's determination. "It's a bit late to be selling flowers, don't you think?" he asked, his voice hoarse from such little use. The girl shrugged, an oddly adult gesture for someone so small. "We need the money," she answered simply. It was then that Ian really looked at her, and the world stopped spinning. Those eyes, that face shape, the small birthmark near her right eyebrow. He knew those features, knew them so well that even softened in the child's face before him, they were unmistakable. They were Isadora's features. What's your name?" Ian asked, his voice suddenly weak. "Luma," the girl replied, eyeing him curiously. "Are you going to buy the flowers?" Ian couldn't breathe. It was as if every molecule of oxygen had been sucked from the air around him. A little girl with Isadora's face, selling flowers in the rain. "Luma, come here now." 3 other girls came running over, all wearing worn coats in different colors. One carried a similar basket of flowers. The other 2 seemed concerned with getting their sister out of there. "We don't talk to strangers, remember?" said the one who seemed oldest, glaring at Ian suspiciously. Ian felt his legs go weak. 1, 2, 3, 4 girls, all with features he recognized better than his own. One with the shape of his eyes, another with a determined chin, the third with a hesitant smile. And Luma, with that tiny birthmark near her eyebrow that had always been Isadora's hallmark. Who's your mum?" The question slipped out before he could contain it. The girls looked at each other, distrust evident in their eyes. "Why do you want to know?" asked the tallest, positioning herself protectively in front of her sisters. I just... Ian couldn't form a coherent answer. How could he explain the inexplicable? The oldest grabbed Luma's hand, ready to pull her away. "Wait," Ian said quickly, taking out his wallet. "I'll buy all the flowers." The girl stopped, watching cautiously as he took out several bills. It was far more than the asking price, but Ian hardly noticed. "That's a lot of money, sir," said the oldest girl, her eyes fixed on the bills in his hand. "You're selling in the rain. You deserve it," Ian replied, extending the money. The oldest hesitated, then carefully took the notes. "Luma, give the man the flowers," she instructed. Luma handed the small soaked bouquet to Ian, who took it mechanically, his eyes never leaving the girls' faces. "What's your name?" he asked the oldest. "Luna," she replied after a pause. "And these are Leah and Liz," she added, pointing to the other 2. Luna, Luma, Leah, and Liz, 4 names beginning with L. Isadora had always said that if she ever had daughters, she'd want names that started with the same letter. So they'll always remember they're part of the same story, she used to say. Do you live around here? Ian asked, trying to sound casual. Luna frowned. We need to go home now. Our mom's waiting. Ian knew he shouldn't push her, but 6 years of unanswered questions were about to explode inside him. Can I walk you home? It's raining heavily. No, thank you, Luna replied firmly. We live close by. The girls started to walk away, but little Leah turned around. We live near the park on Linden Street. The house with the blue door, she said, ignoring Luna's reproachful look. Ian stood there, watching the 4 small figures move off along the wet sidewalk. His mind worked frantically, trying to process what had just happened. Isadora, after 6 years with no news, no letter, no call. 6 years believing she had simply decided to leave him, that maybe she had never really loved him. And now, 4 small versions of her selling flowers in the rain. How long he remained there, Ian couldn't say. The rain continued to pour, drenching him completely, but he barely noticed. Finally, as if waking from a trance, he started walking in the direction the girls had gone. The park, Linden Street. It wasn't far. Ian knew the way. He had passed by there dozens of times during his lonely walks. He'd never paid attention to the houses, the neighbors, the doors. Why would he? They were just anonymous backdrops in his empty life. The park's trees came into view, their golden and red leaves providing a melancholic contrast against the grey sky. Linden Street was just beyond, a row of terraced houses built in the last century. Ian slowed his pace as he entered the narrow street. The houses, all in a line, had the same design, differing only in the colors of their doors and the conditions of their tiny front gardens. He moved slowly, examining each door. A faded green, red, brown, white, blue. There it was, a faded blue door, the paint peeling at the edges. A simple house with a minuscule garden out front. The curtains were drawn, but a faint light shone through the worn fabric. Ian stopped on the opposite side of the street, sheltered by the shadow of a large linden tree. For the first time since he had seen the girls, the reality of what he was doing hit him. He was literally following children to their home. Any sensible person would call the police. But this wasn't just anyone. This was Isadora, the woman who had disappeared in the middle of the night, taking with her all the explanations, all the promises, all the dreams they had built together. The blue door opened. Ian instinctively stepped back, retreating further into the shadows. The 4 girls entered quickly, shaking water from their coats, and for a brief instant before the door closed, he saw an adult figure in the hallway. Even at a distance, even in the dim light, even after 6 years, he would recognize that silhouette anywhere. Isadora. Ian felt his legs tremble. He leaned on the rough trunk of the linden tree, breathing with difficulty. She was there, just a few yards away. The woman he had loved more than anything. The woman who had simply vanished. The door closed, leaving Ian once again alone with his thoughts, his questions, the pain that had never really healed. Should he go over there, knock on the door, demand explanations? And those girls, 4 little girls with her features, the math was simple and painful. If the oldest appeared to be 5 or 6, that meant Isadora was pregnant when she disappeared. Or maybe she already knew she was pregnant and never told him. A wave of anger, pain, and confusion coursed through him. Why didn't she say anything? Why never come back? Why did she deny him the chance to know his daughters? Ian took a step toward the house, then another. The rain continued mercilessly, but he didn't feel it anymore. Each step toward that peeling blue door seemed to carry the weight of all the lost years. He crossed the street and stopped in front of the house. Through the living room window, behind thin curtains, he could see movement. The girls likely talking about selling flowers, about the stranger who had paid so much more than they asked. Ian raised his hand, ready to knock. His fingers trembled, not from the cold but from a mixture of fear and hope he had never felt before. Then he lowered his hand. What would he say? How would he explain he had followed her? How would he face 6 years of abandonment, of unanswered questions, of sleepless nights imagining where she might be, why she had gone. And those girls, they didn't know him. To them, he was just a stranger in the street. A stranger now standing at their door, soaked from the rain, trembling like a leaf. Ian took a step back. Then another. The conversation he had waited 6 years for would have to wait a bit longer. He needed to organize his thoughts, his heart, his words. He retreated to the shelter of the tree across the street. From there, he watched the house for several minutes, as if waiting for it to suddenly reveal all the answers to the questions that had haunted him since Isadora disappeared. Why did she leave without explanation? Why never contact him? The girls. Could they be his daughters? The last question made his heart clench. 4 little girls who looked like Isadora, selling flowers in the rain to buy medicine for their mother. Was Isadora sick, in need of money for medicine? Why hadn't she sought help? Why not turn to him? A sudden memory hit him, the last conversation they had before she vanished. Nothing special, no argument, no sign of what was coming. Just weekend plans, tired smiles after a day of work, a goodnight kiss. And then, when he woke up, she simply wasn't there anymore. No note, no explanation, just an absence that stretched on for 6 years. Ian finally turned away and began walking back, each step feeling like lead. The same streets he had walked just moments before now felt completely different. The whole world had changed the moment he saw that girl with the flowers. Ian's apartment was impersonal, more like a hotel room than a home. After Isadora's disappearance, he moved, unable to keep living in the place they had shared. The new space was functional, organized, and utterly devoid of personality, just as he had tried to be for the past 6 years. He took off his drenched coat and tossed it over a chair, not caring about the water dripping on the floor. He set the soggy flowers on the table, flowers that had reopened wounds he believed were healed. Ian went to the bathroom and stood under the hot shower for several minutes, as if the water could wash away the chaos in his mind. When he emerged, he grabbed his phone and called the only person he was still close friends with. "Thomas, it's me," he said, when his friend picked up. "You still work at the Civil Records Department?" Thomas's voice sounded surprised on the other end. "Ian, yes, I still work there. Why, what happened?" Ian hesitated. How could he explain what had happened without sounding insane? "I need a favor, an important favor." "Sure, whatever you need," Thomas replied, concern evident in his voice. "I need you to check birth records. 4 girls, last name probably Almeida, all with names starting with L." There was a long silence on the other end. "Ian, does this have to do with her?" "With Isadora?" Ian closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the question. "I think I found her, Thomas, and I think I have 4 daughters." More long seconds of silence followed before Thomas replied, "I'll check first thing tomorrow." "Are you sure you want to know?" Ian looked at the flowers on the table, their delicate stems bent under the weight of the water. "I need to know, Thomas. I need to understand why she left." After hanging up, Ian sat on the couch, running his hands over his tired face. On the shelf beside him, hidden behind books, was the only photo of Isadora he couldn't bring himself to throw away. A small framed picture of her smiling against the sun, dark hair blowing in the wind. The last happy memory before everything fell apart. Ian picked up the frame, tracing her face with his fingertips. "Where have you been all this time?" he whispered to the silent image. "Why did you never come back?" There were no answers in that empty apartment, only the sound of rain against the windows and the echo of questions repressed for years. The past he thought he'd buried had resurfaced with full force, demanding to be faced. Ian placed the photo back on the shelf, this time without hiding it. A silent decision was forming in his heart. Tomorrow he would return to that house with the blue door. Tomorrow he would finally get his answers. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that some truths are more painful than uncertainty, and that the path to reclaim what was lost might require more courage than he thought he possessed. Night fell over Edinburgh as Ian remained motionless, trapped between the past that had just resurfaced and the uncertain future waiting beyond that peeling blue door. The flowers on his apartment floor were the only proof that the encounter hadn't been just another dream of what might have been. Ian woke before his alarm rang. In fact, he had barely slept. The image of Isadora, even if seen only for an instant, hadn't left his mind all night. The hours dragged by in a haze of past memories and present questions, while he lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the first sign of morning. Thomas had called early, confirming what Ian already suspected. Luna, Luma, Leah, and Liz Almeida, all registered with only the mother's surname. The father's name was listed as unknown on the documents. The eldest was born exactly 7 months after Isadora's disappearance. Ian didn't know how to process the information. He felt anger, confusion, sadness, and, strangely, something close to hope. She had moved on without him, but a part of him, the most selfish part perhaps, felt relief knowing Isadora hadn't left him for another man. It was a little past 9 when Ian finally gathered the courage to leave his apartment. The day was surprisingly clear after the previous night's storm, as if the sky had washed away all the clouds. Ian wished his mind could clear itself as easily. The walk to Linden Street felt endless. Each step toward that house carried a whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and rehearsals of what he would say when he finally stood face to face with Isadora. The peeling blue door looked even more worn in the morning light. Ian stopped in front of it, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of his chest. He took a deep breath, once, twice, 3 times. Then, before his courage failed him, he raised his hand and knocked. Silence. For a moment, Ian thought no one was home. Maybe he had missed his chance. Maybe she had realized he'd found her and fled again. The thought made his stomach clench at the possibility of another 6 years of unanswered questions. Then he heard light footsteps approaching from the other side of the door. A brief pause, as if the person was hesitating, and finally, the sound of the lock being opened. The door moved slowly, revealing the face that had haunted his dreams and nightmares for 6 years. Isadora. She was thinner, her hair shorter, with dark circles marking her pale skin. But her eyes were the same, those intense brown eyes that had once been his refuge, now looking at him with a mixture of surprise and something he couldn't decipher. Fear, anger, perhaps both. Ian. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a greeting. It was just the statement of a fact, spoken with a voice he hadn't heard in so long he had almost forgotten its exact tone. Isadora, he replied, the word coming out more like a sigh than a name. They stood there for a few seconds that seemed to stretch into infinity, 2 strangers who once knew every detail of each other, now separated not just by a half-open door, but by 6 years of silence. "What are you doing here?" she finally asked, her voice firm, controlled, but with a subtle tremor Ian didn't miss. "I saw the girls yesterday, selling flowers in the rain," Ian began awkwardly. "I couldn't believe it. After all this time." Isadora closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to compose herself. When she opened them again, her gaze had hardened. "How did you find me?" "It was by chance. I was heading home from work and I saw Luma selling flowers. Ian hesitated. "She has your birthmark near her eyebrow." A muscle twitched in Isadora's jaw. She opened the door wider, enough to be fully visible, but kept her body firmly in the entrance, blocking any chance of Ian stepping inside. "So you followed us." It wasn't a question, and Ian didn't try to deny it. "I needed to know if it was really you." "Well, now you know." Isadora's voice took on a hardness he had never heard before. "What do you want, Ian? Did you come to demand explanations after 6 years?" Ian felt anger rising, mingling with the confusion and pain he had carried for so long. "Yes, actually. I woke up one day and you were gone. No note, no warning, nothing. And now I find out I have 4 daughters I've never even met." Isadora's face lost some of its color. "You don't have daughters. Don't lie to me, Isadora. Not after all this. I have eyes. They look like me, like you. The dates match." "You have no right, no right," Ian cut in, his voice rising before he could control it. "You vanished from my life without a word. I spent years wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough. I searched for you in every face on the street, every crowd. And now I find out that all this time you were raising our daughters without giving me a chance to know them." Isadora stepped out, pulling the door partially closed behind her, as if wanting to protect whatever was inside. "You hurt me badly," she said, each word laced with bitterness that seemed to have brewed over the years. The statement caught Ian off guard. "What? How?" "We were fine. We were making plans for the future. I had just proposed to you, for God's sake." "Stop pretending, Ian. It doesn't work anymore." Isadora crossed her arms, a physical barrier matching the emotional wall she had erected. "I know everything. I saw the messages, the photos. I heard the promises you made to her while making the same ones to me." Ian felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. "What are you talking about? What messages? What promises? There was never anyone else, Isadora." A sad, disbelieving smile curved her lips. "Go away, Ian. I won't relive this. I won't let you mess up my life again." "Isadora, please, this has to be some misunderstanding. I never—" "Enough!" The word burst out with such force that Ian stepped back. "I don't want to hear anything else, and I don't want you near my daughters. Their life is complicated enough without a father who shows up out of nowhere after 6 years." The pain in Ian's chest was physical, as though every word from her mouth was a blade cutting deep. "They are my daughters too," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "No, they are the daughters you never wanted, remember?" Isadora's eyes gleamed with barely contained tears. "Your last words to me before I left." Ian shook his head, utterly confused and desperate. "I never said that. I never even knew you were pregnant. If I had known, I would have..." "Would have what?" "Continued lying, living 2 lives. Leave us alone, Ian. We've moved on. I suggest you do the same." With that, Isadora retreated into the house, her hand firmly on the door, ready to slam it shut. "Please," Ian tried one last time. "There's something very wrong here. I never cheated on you, never wanted anyone else, and I certainly never knew about the pregnancy. If I had known..." Too late. 2 simple words, spoken with a finality that left no room for argument. "Don't come near the girls. They don't need that kind of confusion in their lives." The door clicked shut, softly but definitively. Ian remained motionless, staring at the peeling blue paint, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The conversation he had awaited for 6 years had brought no relief. Only more questions, messages, photos. Another woman. It was all absurd, a terrible mix-up that had cost them 6 years of their lives, and 4 girls growing up without a father. The sun was shining brightly now, indifferent to the storm raging inside him. Ian finally stepped away from the door, his steps heavy. Something had happened 6 years ago, something that made Isadora believe he was capable of betraying her. And now, that same something was keeping him from his daughters. The pain was evident on his face as he descended the few steps from the front door, but along with the pain, a new determination was forming. She might have sent him away, forbidden him from seeing the girls, but he wouldn't give up. Not now that he finally knew his daughters existed, not after realizing Isadora hadn't left him for someone else, but because she believed he had betrayed her, not after understanding that someone, at some point, had deliberately destroyed what they had. Ian looked one last time at the house with the blue door before walking off. He would respect Isadora's wish for now, but he wouldn't give up. Not this time. Not so easily. Isadora's rejection burned in Ian for days. Her accusations, so absurd, so incomprehensible, spun around in his mind like a frantic carousel. Messages he never sent, photos he never took, promises he never made to another woman. Something had happened 6 years ago, something serious enough to make Isadora believe he was capable of cheating on her. And now, that same something kept him away from his daughters. His daughters. The idea was still strange, almost unreal. 4 small girls with features that mirrored both him and Isadora, living just a few miles away, unaware that their father spent sleepless nights thinking about them. Ian returned to work, but his mind was never really on the projects. Everyone in the office noticed the change, the reserved, methodical man now constantly distracted, lost in thoughts that clearly tormented him. "Are you okay, Matthews?" his boss asked one particularly difficult morning, when Ian had spent almost an hour staring at the same blueprint without doing a thing. "Yes, just personal issues," he replied vaguely. The boss, A practical man who valued privacy as much as efficiency only nodded. "If you need a few days," Ian shook his head. "I'm fine. I just need to get organized." But the truth was, he had never been further from fine. Every hour at the office was torture, knowing he should be unraveling the mystery that had ruined his life, that he should be getting to know his daughters. After a week of inner torment, Ian made a decision. If Isadora didn't want explanations, if she didn't believe him, if she wouldn't let him meet the girls, that was fine. He would respect that, but he wouldn't stand idle while they sold flowers in the rain to buy medicine. That Saturday morning, Ian left early and went to the big market in the city center. He carefully filled a cart with fresh fruit of all kinds, vegetables, bread, meat, milk, eggs, cereals, simple, nutritious things 4 growing children would need. In the children's section, he hesitated. He didn't know the girls' preferences, didn't know what they already had or what they really needed. He ended up choosing 4 identical teddy bears in different colors, so no one would feel left out. He added some picture books and a memory game. At the checkout, when the cashier totaled everything, Ian realized he'd spent nearly half his weekly salary. He didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt his money was being used for something that truly mattered. He carried the bags to the car and drove slowly to Linden Street. It was very early, the sun barely up. The streets were deserted, the houses still asleep under the pale morning sky. Ian parked at a safe distance and walked quietly to the blue-doored house. His heart pounded, afraid of being seen, of violating Isadora's request, of causing more harm than good. But the need to do something, anything for those girls, outweighed his fear. He placed the bags carefully by the door. For a moment, he thought about leaving a note, some explanation. But what would he say? How could he sum up everything he felt in a few lines? In the end, he chose silence. Maybe that was better. It was almost fully light by the time Ian returned to his car. From there, he watched the house for a few minutes. The curtains remained closed, no sign of movement. Finally, he started the engine and drove away. A strange sense of peace settling over him, a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The following week, he did the same. This time, in addition to basic groceries, he included new, soft blankets. He'd noticed the days were getting colder, and the house seemed ill-prepared for the approaching winter. And so began a silent routine. Every week, Ian left provisions by the blue door before dawn. He was never seen, never left a note. He was like a benevolent elf, appearing and disappearing without leaving any trace beyond the carefully arranged bags. In his apartment, on the shelf that used to house only technical architecture books, there were now teddy bears identical to those he'd bought for the girls. Children's books he wished he could read to them, small gifts he hoped to one day give them in person. It was his way of connecting with the daughters he still didn't know, preparing for the day he might finally be part of their lives. A month passed in this strange, wordless communication. Ian didn't know if Isadora realized it was him providing the weekly supplies. Sometimes he imagined her throwing everything away, refusing to accept anything that came from him. The thought tormented him, but he continued. He had to believe that if not for his sake, she'd accept it for the girls' sake. One particularly cold Saturday, Ian was leaving the usual bags when he noticed something different. The living room curtain moved slightly. For the briefest moment, he saw Isadora's face and looking straight at him, her eyes gleaming in the faint morning light. Ian froze, his heart pounding. He waited for her to open the door, to shout at him, to send him away again. But nothing happened. The curtain fell back in place and the house remained quiet. He understood the message. She knew. She had always known. And while she hadn't forgiven him, while she didn't want him around, she was allowing this minimal connection, this silent support. It was a start. A small and fragile start, but a start nonetheless. 2 weeks later, when autumn was almost over, Ian was returning from a walk near the park when he spotted the 4 girls playing in a small playground. He stopped at a respectful distance and just watching. They looked healthier than the first time he'd seen them. Rosier cheeks, newer coats, more frequent smiles on their faces. Ian had no intention of approaching. He'd given Isadora his word, but Luna, the eldest, noticed him first. She said something to her sisters, and they all looked his way. For a tense moment, Ian thought they would run, frightened by his presence, but to his surprise, Luma waved timidly. And then, as if they'd made a collective decision, all four began walking in his direction. Ian stood frozen, uncertain of what to do. If he walked away, he might appear rude. If he stayed, he might be disrespecting Isadora's request. Before he could decide, they were already standing in front of him, 4 pairs of curious eyes studying him. "Hello," said Luna formally, taking on the role of spokesperson for the group. "You're the man who bought our flowers that day, right?" Ian nodded, his voice suddenly stuck in his throat. Up close, the similarities were even more obvious. It was like looking at mini versions of himself and Isadora. "Yes, that was me," he managed to say at last. The girls exchanged glances, as if confirming something among themselves. "Thank you for the fruit, mister," Luma said softly. "Green apples are my favorite." Ian felt his heart clench. So they knew. And more importantly, they were receiving the things he left. "It was nothing," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mum's really sick," Leah, the smallest of them, continued. Her large brown eyes, so much like Isadora's, were serious and worried. "She coughs a lot at night." Ian frowned, genuinely concerned. "Is she taking any medicine?" Luna nodded. "Yes, but it's not helping much. She says it's just a cold." "We help however we can," added Liz, the quietest of the 4. "I make lemon tea with honey. I learned it from our neighbor." A lump formed in Ian's throat. Children so young shouldn't have to worry about such things. They shouldn't have to care for a sick mother, sell flowers in the rain, prepare healing teas. "You're very brave," he said sincerely. The girls smiled, looking a bit embarrassed by the compliment. "We need to go," Luna said after a moment. "Mum doesn't like it when we take too long." Ian nodded, struggling against the urge to hug them, to tell them who he was, to promise everything would be okay. This wasn't the time. Not yet. "Sure. Take care, okay?" They all nodded in unison and started to walk away. But Luma turned back one last time. "Will you keep leaving the bags?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Ian promised. "Every Saturday." A smile lit the girl's face. "Thank you." And then they were gone, 4 small figures in colorful coats running through the park, back to the house with the blue door, back to Isadora. Ian remained where he was, watching until they disappeared from sight. A mixture of joy and pain consumed him, joy at having spoken to his daughters, at knowing they were receiving his help. Pain at not being able to do more, not being able to tell the truth, not being able to be the father he wanted to be. But there was something else now. Worry. Isadora was sick. Really sick, in Leah's words. And knowing Isadora, she would downplay anything to avoid worrying the girls. That night, in his apartment, Ian couldn't stop thinking. The girl's words echoed in his mind. "Mum's really sick. She coughs a lot at night. We help however we can. Children shouldn't bear that weight, and Isadora shouldn't be fighting an illness alone, taking care of 4 little daughters." Ian felt a determination rise within him. He had to be more present, not just as the mysterious stranger leaving bags at the door, but as someone who could really help, someone who could make a difference in their lives. How to do that, while respecting Isadora's boundaries, he still didn't know, but he would find a way. He had to. The following Saturday, in addition to the usual bags of food and necessities, Ian left something else. Cold medicine, cough syrup, vitamins, and for the first time, a small note. "I hope you feel better soon. The girls need you." He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. The silence between them already had its own language, its own unwritten rules. It was a dialogue made of grocery bags, shifting curtains, furtive glances through the window. It was strange, awkward, imperfect, but it was a beginning. And maybe, with time and patience, that silence could give way to words, to explanations, to truths. As he returned to his car that cold morning, Ian looked one last time at the house with the blue door. A soft light glowed in the kitchen, shining through a gap in the curtain. Someone was awake. Someone had seen. Ian smiled slightly, started the car, and drove away. The silence would continue for now, but something had changed. He could feel it. The girls knew. Isadora allowed it. And for the first time in 6 years, he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a path back to the family he never knew he had. The silence at the gate had become their only means of communication. But maybe it was exactly what they needed now. That wordless space where they could begin rebuilding the fragments of what they once were, of what they might be again. Ian drove along the deserted Saturday morning streets, his mind full of plans. He would be more present. He would find a way to help Isadora with her illness. He would take care of the girls, even from a distance. And perhaps, one day, he would discover the truth about what really happened 6 years ago. Who lied? Who created the false evidence? Who destroyed everything they had? But that search would have to wait. Now the priority was Isadora and the girls, their health, their well-being, their safety. The silence at the gate was just the beginning of a long journey home, a home Ian had never known, but now knew existed on Linden Street behind a peeling blue door. Night fell over Edinburgh when the doorbell to Ian's apartment rang, an insistent, desperate sound that cut through the quiet like an alarm. Ian was in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner, when he heard it. He frowned, puzzled. He wasn't expecting visitors. When he opened the door, his heart nearly stopped. There they were, Luna, Luma, Leah, and Liz. 4 small figures out of breath, their faces pale with worry, eyes wide with fear. "Sir, please," Luna said, her voice cracking as she tried to stay composed. "Our mum. She won't wake up." Ian's world seemed to slow down. For a moment, he was paralyzed by the news. Then the urgency of the situation hit him with full force. "Where is she?" he asked, already grabbing his car keys and coat. "At home," Luna replied. "She was coughing a lot. Then she lay down and now she doesn't answer when we call." "How did you get here?" Ian asked as he headed downstairs with the girls, hurrying to the parking area. "Mom had your address written down," Luma explained. "In a little box where she keeps important things." Ian felt a pang in his chest. Isadora had kept his address. As much as he wanted to reflect on what that meant, now was the time for action, not contemplation. "Get in the car," he instructed, opening the doors of his old Volvo. "Buckle up." The drive to Isadora's house had never felt so long. The girls in the back seat were silent, only Leah's occasional sobs breaking the tense hush. Ian tried to remain calm, but his heart pounded like a frantic drum in his chest. When they finally reached Linden Street, Ian parked abruptly in front of the house with the blue door. He barely turned off the engine before jumping out, the girls right behind him. Luna had the key, and her small hands trembled so much that Ian gently took it from her and opened the door himself. "Isadora," he called, stepping inside the house for the first time. "Isadora, can you hear me?" The interior was modest but cozy. Photos of the girls decorated the walls. The furniture was simple yet well kept, everything impeccably organized despite limited resources. Under other circumstances, Ian would have stopped to take in every detail of this home Isadora had built without him. But now, his only focus was finding her. "In the bedroom," Luna pointed to a half-open door at the end of the corridor. Ian rushed down the hall, heart in his throat. And there she was, lying on the bed, her face pale and damp with sweat, her breathing shallow and strained. Even in that state, she was beautiful and terrifyingly fragile. "Isadora," he called softly, kneeling beside the bed. "Isadora, it's me, Ian." She didn't respond. Ian touched her forehead. She was burning with fever. "How long has she been like this?" he asked Luna, who stood in the doorway with her sisters. "She started coughing a lot yesterday," the girl replied. "Today she couldn't get up to take us to school. She said she just needed a little rest. But it got worse." Ian didn't hesitate. He scooped Isadora into his arms, shocked at how light she was, almost too fragile. 6 years of separation didn't matter at that moment, nor did 6 years of questions, anger, or confusion. Everything disappeared in the face of the present urgency. "We're taking her to the hospital," he announced firmly. "Grab coats, you'll need them while we wait for the doctors to examine her." The girls obeyed immediately, running to get what they needed. Ian carried Isadora gently to the car, laying her across the back seat, her head in Luna's lap. The other three squeezed into the front passenger seat. During the drive to the hospital, Ian alternated glances in the rearview mirror between Isadora and the girls beside him, trying to reassure them with smiles that did nothing to hide his own worry. "She'll be fine," he repeated, more to himself than to them. "Your mom is strong. She'll be okay." At the hospital, everything happened quickly. The emergency team acted efficiently, placing Isadora on a stretcher and taking her immediately inside. Ian kept the girls close as a nurse asked questions about symptoms, medical history, allergies. "It's pneumonia," the doctor said after the initial tests, "and quite severe. Her oxygen levels are low. We need to admit her straight away." Ian nodded, feeling the weight of the four girls clinging to him like small anchors in a sea of uncertainty. "How long will she need to stay?" he asked. "Hard to say right now, at least a few days. We'll start intravenous antibiotics and oxygen therapy. The important thing is that you brought her in time." The doctor's words weighed on Ian. In time. If the girls hadn't known his address, if they hadn't been brave enough to come get him, if they had waited any longer. Before Isadora was taken to a ward, they had a brief moment to see her. She was conscious now, though visibly weak. When she saw Ian standing by the stretcher, the girls around him, a flicker of confusion crossed her feverish eyes. "The girls," she murmured, voice barely audible. Ian leaned down to hear better. "Take care of them," Isadora whispered before they wheeled her away. Those two simple words carried a weight of trust Ian never imagined he'd receive again. After 6 years of silence and distrust, in this moment of extreme vulnerability, Isadora was entrusting her daughters, her precious daughters, to him. The impact hit him like a wave. He looked at the four girls, who now depended on him, and made a silent promise to Isadora, to them, to himself. He wouldn't let them down. Not this time. "Let's go, girls," he said gently. "We'll go to my place. Your mum needs rest to get better." On the way to his apartment, he stopped at a 24-hour pharmacy to buy toothbrushes and other basic items the girls would need. Next door at the supermarket, he filled the cart with foods he thought kids liked: cereal, cookies, milk, fruit, ingredients for pancakes. His bachelor apartment, usually so quiet and orderly, suddenly felt too small to accommodate 4 children. Ian had never cared about the limited space before, but now, seeing the girls look around curiously, he wished he had somewhere bigger, more welcoming. "Is this where you live, mister?" asked Liz, looking at the shelves full of architecture books. "Yes," Ian answered, suddenly aware of how austere the place must seem to children. "And you can call me Ian." "Ian," Luma repeated, testing the name. "Do you know our mom from way back?" The question caught Ian by surprise. What should he say? That he knew Isadora better than anyone, that he had loved her with every fiber of his being, that he was probably their father. "Yes," he answered simply. "I've known your mum for a long time." The girls seemed to accept the answer without further questions. They were too tired, too worried about Isadora to dig deeper. "Let's make something to eat," Ian suggested, heading to the kitchen. "Then we can set up a place for you to sleep." The girls followed him, still a bit hesitant but noticeably more at ease than they'd been when they'd shown up at his door just hours earlier. Ian had never cooked for children before, but he remembered his own childhood and the simple dishes his mother used to make: scrambled eggs, toast with jam, hot chocolate milk. Comfort food for a hard day. To his surprise, Luna offered to help. She took eggs out of the bag and began cracking them into a bowl with the confidence of someone who'd done it countless times. "I help Mom in the kitchen," she explained, when she noticed Ian's admiring look. "We're a team." Ian felt a lump in his throat. This child, so young, already carried adult responsibilities. From the way the other 3 followed and obeyed her, it was clear Luna had taken on a maternal role whenever Isadora wasn't able. They ate in silence, each lost in thought, until Leah, the youngest, started yawning. "Time for bed," Ian announced, getting up to arrange makeshift beds. His apartment had only one bedroom, but the living room was large enough. Ian brought out all the blankets and pillows he could find, and with the girls' help, built a huge blanket fort in the middle of the room. "Wow!" exclaimed Luma, her eyes shining for the first time that night. "A real fort." "Every fort needs a story," Ian said, surprising even himself. He wasn't a storyteller, never had been particularly creative, but something in the hopeful eyes of the four girls awakened something inside him. They all sat inside the fort, illuminated only by a small flashlight Ian found in a drawer. He began telling a story about four brave princesses who set out on a quest to find a magical flower that could heal their queen. The story was simple, improvised, but the girls listened with rapt attention, their eyes shifting between fear and hope as the narrative progressed. Ian realized that, without meaning to, he was telling a fairy tale version of their own situation. "Did the princesses succeed?" asked Leah when he paused. "Did they find the magic flower?" Ian smiled, looking at each of them. "Yes," he stated firmly. "They were brave and determined. Nothing could stop them from saving their queen." One by one, the girls drifted off inside the blanket fort. First Leah, then Liz, then Luma. Luna was last, fighting sleep as though she still needed to keep watch. "You can rest," Ian told her gently. "I promise I'll be here if you need anything." Luna's eyes, so much like Isadora's, studied his face for a long moment. "Will you take us to see Mom tomorrow?" "First thing in the morning," he promised. Luna nodded, apparently satisfied, and finally let her eyes close. Minutes later, her breathing deepened, joining the soft chorus of her sleeping sisters. Ian slipped quietly out of the fort and sat on the couch, watching the four small figures sleeping. How was it possible to love so deeply those he barely knew? How could his heart, dormant for so long, now overflow with feelings almost painful in their intensity? He picked up his phone and called the hospital. Isadora was stable, the nurse told him. They'd started antibiotics, and she was responding well to treatment. The news brought momentary relief, but Ian knew the road ahead could still be long. In the days that followed, a new routine settled in. In the morning, he made breakfast for the girls, pancakes with fruit, cereal, scrambled eggs, then took them to the hospital to visit Isadora. The visits were brief, since she needed rest, but essential for reassuring the girls. In the afternoon, after lunch back at his place, Ian improvised activities. Drawing, board games, more blanket forts, ever more elaborate stories about the four brave princesses. He did everything he could to keep their minds off their worries, to make them smile despite the constant concern about their mom. At night, when they were all asleep, Ian stayed awake, watching them, amazed by the resilience of these children who, in such a short time, had completely captured his heart. On the third day, he took them shopping for new clothes. They couldn't keep wearing the same outfits, and Ian doubted Isadora would mind given the circumstances. It was a chaotic but joyous trip. For the first time since Isadora's hospitalization, the girls seemed genuinely relaxed, acting like normal kids excited about new things. On the fourth day, while Ian was preparing lunch, simple pasta they had come to love, Luma approached, watching him cook with curiosity. "Ian," she began hesitantly, "are you going to stay with us, mister?" The question caught Ian off guard. He turned to find not just Luma, but all four watching him expectantly. He realized, with a mix of joy and sadness, that in just a few days he had become a constant figure in their lives, someone they trusted, someone who provided stability at a chaotic time. "If your mom allows it," he answered honestly, meeting each of their gazes, "I'll never leave." It wasn't an empty promise. In the few days he had spent caring for them, Ian had discovered a part of himself he never knew existed. The father he might have been all these lost years. The father he still wanted to be. Luma smiled, seeming satisfied with his answer. The others also appeared to accept his words as a genuine pledge. That night, after putting the girls to bed with another story about the brave princesses, who had now found the magic flower and were returning to their kingdom, Ian sat beside the blanket fort, watching them drift off. The doctor had called earlier. Isadora was responding well to treatment. If she continued improving, she could be discharged in 2 days. The news should have filled Ian with relief, but it also brought apprehension. What would happen when Isadora came home? Would she allow him to remain in the girls' lives? Would this forced truce brought on by her illness be enough to open the door to an honest conversation about the past? Ian had no answers. All he knew was that in just a few days, 4 little girls had filled a void in his life he hadn't even realized was there, and he was willing to do anything not to lose them again. If your mom allows it, I'll never leave. The promise echoed in his mind as he closed his eyes, exhausted yet strangely at peace. For the first time in 6 years, Ian slept without dreaming of the past. His subconscious was too busy building images of a possible future, a future with Isadora and 4 brave little princesses. The day of Isadora's discharge arrived, along with a timid sun that struggled to break through Edinburgh's clouds. It was as if the sky itself wanted to celebrate the end of the storm. Ian parked in front of the hospital, heart racing. The girls in the back seat could barely contain their excitement. After almost a week, they would finally take their mom home. "Remember what we talked about?" Ian said gently, glancing in the rearview mirror at the 4 eager faces. "Your mom is still weak. We have to be gentle and patient." "Can we show her the drawings we made?" asked Liz, holding a folder full of colorful papers. "Of course," Ian smiled. "She'll love them." They all entered the hospital, a peculiar little procession, Ian in front, Luna and Luma hand in hand behind him, followed by Leah and Liz, each carrying their precious artwork. To any onlooker, they appeared to be a typical family picking up a loved one. No one could have guessed the complexity of the story that both united and separated them. Isadora was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in simple clothes Ian had brought from her house. She looked thinner than before her hospitalization, but her cheeks had regained color and her eyes, though tired, were alert. When she saw the girls enter the room, her face lit up with a smile that made Ian's heart squeeze. "Mom!" they shouted in unison, running into her arms. Isadora enveloped them, closing her eyes as if trying to absorb every second of that moment. Over their heads, her gaze met Ian's, who stood discreetly in the doorway. There was something new in her expression, not the distrust of before, but something Ian couldn't fully decipher. Gratitude, maybe, or perhaps a quiet truce. "Shall we go home?" Leah asked anxiously. "Yes, my love," Isadora answered, her voice still a bit hoarse. "Let's go home." A nurse came in with the discharge papers and final instructions. Ian stepped forward to listen to the doctor's advice regarding medications, necessary care, and warning signs in case the pneumonia returned. Isadora remained silent, allowing him to absorb the information as if she had already accepted his presence, his role in this new arrangement. The ride back was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than before. No longer heavy with hurt and unspoken questions. It was a silence of truce, of cautious expectation, like the air before the first snowfall of winter. When they arrived at the blue-doored house, Ian helped Isadora out of the car, offering his arm for support. She accepted with a slight nod, her still weak body leaning against his as they climbed the few steps at the entrance. The house looked different. During her absence, Ian and the girls had tidied up. It was clean, organized, with vases of fresh flowers in the living room and colorful drawings on the walls. In the kitchen, the aroma of homemade soup filled the air. "We made soup, Mum," Luma announced proudly. "Ian taught us how to make it. Vegetable soup, your favorite." Isadora looked around, taking in the subtle changes, the harmony that seemed to have emerged in her absence. The girls moved through the house with a joy she hadn't seen in a long time. And Ian, the man who, for 6 years, had been only a painful memory, was now here, present and real, filling spaces she hadn't even known were empty. "Thank you," she said simply, looking directly at Ian, the word carrying far more weight than mere gratitude. Ian nodded, understanding everything left unspoken. "I need to go," he announced, causing visible disappointment in the girls. "Isadora needs to rest, and you all need some time alone with your mum. But you'll come back tomorrow, right?" asked Leah, clinging to his leg. Ian looked to Isadora, a silent question in his eyes. "For dinner," Isadora replied after a moment of hesitation. If you can. It was as if the air in the room changed all at once, as though a small gate had opened, letting in a thread of hope. For dinner, Ian agreed with a reserved smile, I'll be here. And so, a new routine began. Ian showed up every evening for dinner, bringing fresh ingredients, small gifts for the girls, and occasionally medicines or items Isadora needed, but didn't have the strength to get herself. The first dinners were silent and awkward, filled mostly by the girls' chatter, who seemed determined to fill every quiet moment with stories of school, drawings, and childhood dreams. Ian and Isadora spoke little to each other, communicating mostly through looks, small gestures, and occasional smiles at the girls' stories. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. It was Isadora who took the first step, on a night when the girls were already asleep. Ian was washing the dinner dishes when she walked into the kitchen holding an empty mug. More tea, he asked. Yes, please. While Ian prepared the tea, Isadora stood there watching him. When he handed her the mug, their fingers briefly touched, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. The girls adore you, she said softly. Ian paused, surprised by her words. They're amazing, he replied sincerely. You did a wonderful job, Isadora. On your own. A weighted silence followed his words. The elephant in the room, the 6 lost years, the unclear accusations, the truths yet to be spoken. It wasn't easy, she finally admitted. I know, Ian replied. I'm sorry. He wasn't apologizing for something he didn't do, but for the entire situation, for her suffering, for being deprived of his daughters, for being both victims of a manipulation neither understood. Isadora nodded, accepting that partial apology. It was a start. The following week, while the girls were at school, Ian arrived with tools and plants. Your backyard, he explained under her questioning look. I thought we might plant some flowers, maybe a small vegetable garden. The girls would love to help. Isadora hesitated for a moment, then a small smile lit her face. Okay, she agreed, but nothing too ambitious. I don't exactly have a green thumb. They worked side by side in the small backyard. Ian dug up flower beds while Isadora, now stronger, pulled weeds. At times, they almost looked like the couple they once were, joking about the absurd number of worms they found, discussing the best spot for tomatoes, smiling when they got dirt on each other. The girls were overjoyed when they came home from school and saw the work in progress. They immediately joined in, each picking what they wanted to plant and where and why. Ian and Isadora exchanged amused looks over their excited heads, a moment so normal, so ordinary, yet so precious. Dinners together became more than just meals. They were moments of reconnection. Conversations about the girls' days at school evolved into discussions about future plans, old dreams, and occasionally shared memories from before the separation. Remember that Italian restaurant near the theater? Isadora asked one evening, surprising Ian with the reference to their past. Where you always ordered cheese ravioli and then stole half my lasagna? He responded with a smile. Isadora laughed, a sound Ian hadn't heard in so long he'd almost forgotten its musical quality. Their lasagna was better than the ravioli. It wasn't my fault. The girls watched them, intrigued by the glimpse of a past they didn't know, a time when their parents were young, in love, and happy. Were you two friends before? Asked Luna, ever the observant one. Ian and Isadora exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Yes, Isadora finally replied. We were very close. Best friends, Ian added, his eyes never leaving hers. That simple explanation seemed to satisfy the girls for now, though Luna continued to watch both of them with those eyes that missed nothing. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into a month. Autumn slowly gave way to winter, the golden leaves of the lindens in the street falling one by one, like pages of an old story being turned. In the little backyard, they harvested the last vegetables before the frosts, and Ian and Isadora prepared the soil for winter's rest. We need to protect the rose bushes, Isadora noted one particularly cold afternoon. Winters here are brutal. Ian nodded, carefully wrapping the plants with straw and cloth. In spring, he said as he worked, we could expand a bit more. Maybe plant the daisies Liz likes so much. Isadora paused, looking at him with an unreadable expression. In spring, she repeated softly, as if testing the weight of those words, the implied commitment, the idea that Ian would still be around months from now, part of their lives. If you want, he added quickly. Isadora returned to her task, a small smile playing on her lips. Yes, she answered simply. Daisies would be perfect. That's how things were between them now, small steps, cautious conversations, tentative plans that stretched a little further each day. The past was still there, a ghost that occasionally appeared in hesitant looks or unfinished sentences, but it no longer overshadowed every interaction as before. At night, after the girls were asleep, Ian and Isadora often sat in the small living room, sometimes talking about trivial things, sometimes simply enjoying each other's presence in comfortable silence. It was in those moments that Ian realized how far they'd come. The silence between them, once so heavy with anger and unspoken accusations, now had transformed into something else, an atmosphere of acceptance, possibility. One such night, Isadora was curled under a blanket on the sofa, reading a book, while Ian organized his work notes at the table. The scene was so domestic, so natural, that for a moment it seemed as though the 6-year separation had never happened. Ian, she called softly, breaking the comfortable quiet. He looked up, meeting her eyes over the open book. What happened to us? The question, finally spoken after so long, hung between them like a fragile cloud. Ian felt his heart pound. This was it, the moment he'd anticipated and dreaded, the chance to finally understand, to explain, to rebuild the truth buried under years of lies. I don't know, he answered honestly. I never knew why you left. I never understood what happened. Isadora closed the book slowly, setting it aside. Her face was serious but open, receptive in a way it hadn't been before. I think it's time we talked about it. For real. Ian nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Whatever the truth was, they would finally face it together. But that was a conversation for another night, another chapter of their lives. For now, it was enough to know that the hostile silence that had separated them for so long had finally turned into something new, a space where truth, however painful, could finally emerge. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, covering the little garden they'd tended together. In spring there would be daisies. In spring perhaps there would be more. Winter was beginning to give way to the first signs of spring in Edinburgh. Tiny green shoots timidly emerged from the still cold ground, announcing that nature's cycle continued, relentless yet hopeful. Inside the house with the blue door, a similar cycle was unfolding. Isadora, who just weeks ago could barely stand for more than a few minutes, was now moving about the house with increasingly confident steps. Color had returned to her cheeks, a sparkle to her eyes. The pneumonia had left its mark, a lingering cough, occasional fatigue, but her trademark strength was coming back. Ian noticed each small improvement with a mix of relief and admiration. He discreetly observed how she managed to climb the stairs without pausing for breath, how her voice, once weak and shaky, regained the familiar tone he'd never truly forgotten, how her smile, once so rare, now began to appear more often, brightening the entire house. One Saturday morning, Ian arrived for breakfast as usual, bringing fresh bread from the local bakery. The aroma drifting from the kitchen surprised him. It wasn't the usual tea Isadora prepared, but something more elaborate, more complex. Pancakes? He asked as he entered, finding Isadora by the stove, skillfully flipping small golden circles in a pan. She turned with a slight smile, a stray lock of hair falling across her face. The girls asked for them, and I realized I finally had enough energy to stand here mixing batter. It was an ordinary victory, trivial for most, but Ian understood the profound significance behind that gesture. Isadora was reclaiming her independence, her ability to care for her daughters without assistance. Yet the fact that she was sharing this moment with him, instead of waiting until she was alone, said a great deal about his new place in their lives. "Can I help with anything?" he offered. "You can call the girls. They're upstairs picking out what to wear for today's outing." The little ones bounded downstairs like a rainbow avalanche, talking all at once about the park, the swings, and the duck pond they wanted to visit. Ian watched them with a smile, still amazed by their boundless energy. During breakfast, Isadora moved around the kitchen with a grace she hadn't shown for weeks. She served the pancakes, cut fruit, made more tea, small gestures that would have been impossible just a short time ago. Ian observed discreetly, respecting her quiet rebirth. "I think we need to keep a promise today," Ian commented, as he helped clear the table when everyone had finished eating. The girls looked at him curiously. "The seedlings," he explained, smiling. "Remember we talked about planting flowers when the weather got better?" 4 faces lit up instantly. "The daisies!" exclaimed Liz, the quietest of the 4, who rarely showed such excitement. "And sunflowers," added Luma. "You still want to do that?" Ian asked, glancing at Isadora to see if she felt well enough. Isadora smiled, a new smile, freer, less guarded than before. "I think it's time to bring some color into that backyard." Together, they went to the little garden store at the end of the street. The girls ran among the aisles, thrilled by the colors and scents. Luna, always practical, debated which plants were hardier. Luma wanted anything colorful. Leah insisted on seeds that would attract butterflies. Liz, the budding artist, searched for flowers she could draw later. Ian and Isadora followed a few steps behind, sharing amused glances as the girls seriously debated the merits of petunias versus daisies. "They're so determined," Ian remarked. "They take after you," Isadora said softly before she realized what she'd said. Their eyes met, a flicker of electricity passing between them. It was the first time she openly acknowledged, even indirectly, that the girls were his daughters. Ian felt a tightness in his throat. He wanted to speak, but words felt inadequate. He only nodded, lightly touching her arm in a gesture of gratitude. They drove home with the car full of plants, soil, pots, and tools. The girls could hardly wait to start, and soon the little backyard transformed into a lively workspace. Ian showed Luna and Luma how to prepare the soil, while Isadora helped Leah and Liz sort seedlings by color and size. The timid spring sun cast a golden light over the yard, making the moment feel like something out of a dream Ian had often had during his 6 years of solitude. A family, a yard, a future being planted. "Look, Mom," Leah called, showing how she'd planted a small lavender bush. "It'll smell so good when it grows." Isadora came over, kneeling beside her daughter despite the dirt that would stain her pants. She hugged Leah tenderly and kissed her head. "It's perfect, my love. You've got fairy hands for plants." Ian, helping Liz stake her newly planted daisies, looked over at the scene with a full heart. This was the kind of moment he'd feared he would never have. Simple, ordinary, precious. A mother praising her daughter, a garden being planted, laughter filling the late afternoon air. They worked together for hours, hands covered in soil, faces streaked with dirt, hearts feeling lighter by the minute. Isadora, initially wary of overexerting herself, soon became as involved as the others, teaching the girls to identify plants, care for the roots, water them properly. When the last seedling was in the ground and the sun was sinking in the horizon, they sat on the small stone patio, exhausted and satisfied, admiring the result of their combined effort. The once barren yard was now filled with colorful promises. In a few weeks, the first flowers would start to bloom, transforming that space into the little paradise it was always meant to be. "It looks beautiful, doesn't it?" Isadora asked, sitting next to Ian as the girls ran inside to wash up for dinner. "Very," he replied, not looking at the garden but at her. Isadora noticed and blushed slightly, something Ian hadn't seen her do in years. For a moment they were again the young couple they used to be, before the world tore them apart. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for this, for everything." "It's the least I could do," Ian replied. "I would have done this and so much more if—" He stopped, unsure how to continue without invoking the past that still hovered between them like a faint shadow. Isadora nodded, understanding what went unsaid. "I know." The silence that followed was comfortable. filled with possibilities neither of them was ready to name. Possibilities that, like the seeds just planted, needed time, care, and patience to bloom. "I think we have some hungry gardeners waiting for us," Isadora finally said, standing with newfound ease. She offered her hand to help Ian up, a small gesture, but a significant one. Their hands met, dirty from soil, connected by the same life they'd just planted together. Some gestures don't need words. Some hopes don't need grand declarations. Like the plants now resting in freshly prepared soil, some things simply need time, sunlight, water, and a little faith. That special afternoon, under a sky slowly filling with stars, Ian and Isadora found, amid seedlings and children's laughter, the breadcrumbs of a hope in no hurry. A hope that, like spring after a long winter, always finds its way back to the light. Dinner had been peaceful, one of many they now regularly shared. The girls, exhausted after a day of running around the park, went to bed early, falling asleep almost instantly. A comfortable silence settled over the house with the blue door, broken only by the occasional clinking of dishes as Ian and Isadora tidied the kitchen. "It's a lovely night," Ian remarked, looking out the window at the surprisingly clear sky. In Edinburgh, a starry night like that was both rare and precious. Isadora followed his gaze. "We could sit outside," she suggested with an almost imperceptible hesitation. "In the backyard, near the flowers." Ian nodded, trying to hide his surprise. It was the first time Isadora had proposed a moment alone together since he'd re-entered her life. Usually, after dinner and once the girls were asleep, he would say goodnight and return to his apartment. This deviation from routine felt significant, like everything that happened between them these days, each small gesture loaded with unspoken meaning. They grabbed blankets, for even though spring was fairly advanced, the nights were still chilly. They settled into the 2 garden chairs Ian had brought over weeks ago. The young plants around them already showed their first buds, promises of color soon to bloom. For a few minutes, they simply sat there, gazing at the sky, each lost in their own thoughts. The silence between them was no longer the awkward hush of those first encounters after years apart. It had become something soothing, like a well-worn coat that fits just right. "I never thought we'd be here again," Isadora finally said, her voice gentle yet laden with years of bottled-up emotion. "Sitting together under the stars." Ian looked at her face, softly lit by the crescent moon's glow. "I never stopped looking for the stars," he replied. "Even when I thought I'd lost everything." Isadora turned her eyes skyward again, as if seeking courage in the silent constellations above. "Ian," she began, voice now steady, determined. "I think it's time you knew what really happened." Ian felt his heart race. He had waited so long for this moment, imagining it 1,000 different ways. Yet now that it was here, he almost feared what he might hear. "I'm ready," he said simply. Isadora took a deep breath, her gaze still on the starry sky, as if it was easier to speak to the stars than to the man by her side. "It was Caio," she finally revealed, the words lingering in the night air like small sparks. Ian tensed at the mention of his brother's name. Caio, his younger brother. The name brought back childhood memories, once innocent rivalries he'd never considered dangerous, a relationship that had grown distant in adulthood, but that he'd never imagined could shatter so completely. "What did he do?" Ian asked in a whisper, already dreading the answer. Isadora finally turned to face him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "After I left, he found me," she began, voice trembling with the weight of her memories. "He confessed he loved me. He wanted me to stay with him." Ian felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Caio had always admired Isadora, always seemed to hover whenever she visited, but from that to a declaration of love, he'd never suspected. Isadora closed her eyes, trapped in the heaviness of recollection she'd carried alone for so long. "I turned him down," she continued. "I told him my heart still belonged to you." Her voice cracked. "That's when he showed me the fake evidence. Photos, conversations, all lies." The puzzle pieces fell into place in Ian's mind. Isadora's sudden disappearance, the confusing accusations of infidelity. Everything was an elaborate lie, orchestrated by his own brother. What proof? he asked, his voice choked with anger and pain. He had photos of you with another woman, Isadora replied, avoiding his gaze. Edited? I see that now. He also had screenshots of supposed messages from you, texts saying you were tired of me, that you were just waiting for the right moment to break things off. Ian shook his head in disbelief. He even showed phone records for a number supposedly belonging to that woman. Said he'd overheard you making plans with her for after I was out of the picture. The calculated cruelty of the plan left Ian speechless. How could his own brother do something like this? Destroy not just their relationship, but entire lives, futures they should have shared. I believed it, Isadora continued, her voice now barely a whisper, and I ran. I couldn't bear the thought of confronting you, hearing from your lips that you didn't love me anymore. It seemed easier to just vanish. A tear slipped down her cheek, glistening like silver in the moonlight. Then I found out I was pregnant, and my pride stopped me from coming back. I thought you wouldn't want me or the baby. And when I discovered there were 4, she gave a sad smile, well, I was sure I'd made the right choice staying away. Ian felt tears on his own face, ones he hadn't realized he was crying. 6 years. They had lost 6 years over a lie, over the sick obsession of his brother. Kaio told me you were tired of me, he revealed, voice raw with emotion. That you'd met someone else on a business trip, that you were confused about your feelings, that you needed time to think. He paused, fighting the anger welling inside him. I looked for you, but all I found was silence. Their hands found each other on the arm of the chair, fingers intertwining almost of their own accord. The touch was warm, firm, real, a stark contrast to the coldness of the lies that had poisoned their lives for so long. How did you find out? Ian asked gently. That it was all lies. Isadora sighed, squeezing his hand lightly. About a year ago, I ran into Kaio by chance in the city centre. He didn't know I was still in Edinburgh. When he saw me with the girls, something changed in his face. He went pale, started babbling nonsense. Then, maybe out of guilt or maybe to brag, he let slip that he had done what he had to do to get me. She shook her head, recalling the moment. That's when I started questioning everything, looking for flaws in the evidence he'd shown me. Realizing how manipulated I'd been. Why didn't you come to me then? Ian asked, with no accusation in his tone, just curiosity. Fear, Isadora admitted. Shame. How could I explain that I'd thrown away 6 years of our lives because of lies I should have questioned? How could I show up with 4 daughters you never knew existed? She bit her lip. And, to be honest, part of me still feared that maybe, even without Kaio's lies, you wouldn't want this life, wouldn't want us. Ian lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. I would have chosen you and them, always, in any universe. Those words hung between them, simple and true, healing old wounds and opening new possibilities. Both were crying now, but they weren't alone in their pain. For the first time in 6 long years, the truth, no matter how painful, had freed them to begin healing. Kaio's office was on the 10th floor of a modern building in Edinburgh's financial district. Glass and steel, imposing and cold, so different from the welcoming house with the blue door where Ian had been spending most of his time in recent weeks. Ian hadn't called ahead. He hadn't made an appointment. He simply stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 10th floor, feeling a strange calm that contrasted sharply with the inner storm he had fought all night after Isadora's revelations. The receptionist smiled as he approached. Can I help you, sir? I'm here to see Kaio Matthews, Ian replied, voice steady. I'm his brother. The resemblance must have been obvious because the woman nodded without question. He's in a meeting that should end in 5 minutes. Can I offer you coffee while you wait? Ian politely declined and sat in the waiting area, observing the corporate world his brother had chosen. Kaio had always been ambitious, always wanting more. As a child, he'd always wanted Ian's toys. As a teenager, he competed for grades, popularity, attention. As adults, their paths had diverged, Ian pursuing a creative career in architecture, Kaio diving into the corporate world as a financial consultant. Then, of course, there was Isadora, 10 minutes later, the meeting room door opened, and a group of suited executives came out, chatting animatedly. Kaio appeared last, confident, polished, wearing the same smile he used to charm clients and secure promotions. His smile froze when he saw Ian. For a moment, he stood there motionless as if assessing possible escape routes. Then, regaining composure, he walked over. "Ian, what a surprise." His tone was wary, his eyes calculating. "What brings you here?" "We need to talk," Ian said simply, standing up. "In private." Kaio hesitated, then nodded, leading Ian into his personal office. A spacious room with a panoramic view of the city. Expensive paintings on the walls, designer furniture, a gold nameplate on the desk reading Kaio Matthews, a director. He closed the door carefully behind them. "So, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? We haven't seen each other in... how long? A year?" 6 years, Ian corrected calmly. "We saw each other briefly a year ago at our parents' house, but we didn't really talk. It's been 6 years since we had a real conversation." Kaio shrugged, walking to the window. "Time flies. Life goes on." "Yes," Ian agreed. "Life goes on, despite the lies. Despite betrayals." The change in Kaio's posture was subtle but clear, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, a momentary falter in his breathing. "What are you talking about?" Ian sat in one of the chairs opposite the imposing desk. "I found Isadora," he said simply. Her name hung in the air between them like smoke. Kaio remained facing the city, but his fingers gripped the window ledge a bit tighter. "Isadora," he echoed eventually, voice carefully controlled. "After all these years, how is she?" "You know exactly how she is," Ian retorted. "Or at least you did a year ago when you ran into her downtown." Kaio turned slowly, his expression a carefully arranged mask. "She told you?" It wasn't a question. Ian nodded anyway. "Everything, the fake photos, the forged messages, how you declared your love for her after convincing her I'd cheated." Kaio sighed, as though discussing a minor inconvenience in his busy day. "The past is the past, Ian. Whatever happened, happened. We can't change it." "I'm not here to change the past," Ian replied, maintaining the same surprising calm that had settled over him since Isadora's confession. "I'm here to ask why." Something shifted in Kaio's eyes, a spark of real emotion behind his professional facade. "Why?" he repeated, almost with scorn. "Do you really need to ask?" He walked to his executive chair, seating himself like he was about to conduct a business meeting. "I always loved her," he said at last, words filled with an intensity that contradicted his poised posture. "From the first time you brought her home, she was perfect, smart, beautiful, fun, and she looked at you like you were the center of the universe." The bitterness in his voice was palpable now, the professional veneer beginning to crack. "I tried to forget her, you know, tried to move on. But then you announced your engagement, and I..." His voice wavered briefly. "If I couldn't have her, you wouldn't have her either." His confession hung between them, heavy as lead. Ian studied his brother's face, looking for some sign of remorse, any indication that he grasped the enormity of what he'd done. But all he saw was a self-justification disguised as passion. "You stole 6 years from me," Ian said, voice calm even as the words weighed like bricks. 6 years I'll never get back. Years in which my daughters grew up without me." Kaio's eyes widened slightly. "Daughters?" 4, Ian confirmed, born 7 months after Isadora disappeared. 4 girls who never met their father because you decided your desire for Isadora was more important than anything else." Kaio averted his gaze, for the first time looking genuinely affected. "I didn't know about the kids," he mumbled. "When I saw her with them last year, I thought they belonged to someone else." "Would it have mattered?" Ian asked, genuinely curious. Kaio didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Ian stood calmly, adjusting his jacket. "I didn't come here for revenge, Kaio, not even for an apology, because I know it wouldn't be sincere." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I came to tell you that you stole 6 years from me, but you won't steal what we can still build." For the first time, something like regret crossed Kaio's face. "Ian, No," Ian interrupted softly. I don't want to hear it. There are no words that can fix what you did. And there's no relationship that can be rebuilt on such betrayal. He walked to the door, feeling a weight lifting from his shoulders, the weight of a past with no answers, of a story without resolution. As of today, we're no longer brothers, he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. Blood isn't a choice, Kaio, but family is. And you chose not to be mine when you decided to destroy it for your own selfish reasons. Kaio jumped to his feet, the polished veneer shattering at last. You can't just erase the fact that we're brothers. I can, Ian replied serenely, and I just did. With those words, he opened the door and left, leaving behind not just the opulent office but the last tie to the man he once called a brother. In the elevator, alone, Ian closed his eyes briefly. He felt no rage, no desire for revenge, only a clarity he'd long been missing. The clarity of someone who finally sees the complete puzzle of his own life. Stepping onto the street, the spring sun greeted him, warming his face. He thought of the 4 girls who were likely in school at that moment, learning, growing, living. He thought of Isadora, of her returning smile, their late-night talks, the possibilities that were beginning to bloom like the plants in her little garden. He took out his phone and dialed. "Hey," he said when Isadora answered. "I just spoke with Kaio." A brief silence followed on the other end. "How are you?" she finally asked, her voice gentle with concern. Ian looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling a peace he hadn't known in a long time. "Free," he answered simply. "I feel free." And as he walked back to the house with the blue door, the only place he now thought of as home, Ian realized that sometimes cutting ties wasn't a loss but a liberation. Sometimes, to build something new, you have to let go of what was irreparably broken. Blood wasn't a choice, but love. Love was the most important choice of all. Sunday dawned perfect in Edinburgh. Blue skies, bright sun, and a gentle breeze that promised better days ahead. It was as though nature was celebrating with them after such a long storm. Ian arrived at the house with the blue door early, carrying boxes of small flower seedlings. The girls came running to meet him, still in their pajamas, hair messy from recent sleep. "What did you bring?" Luma asked, trying to peek inside the boxes. "It's a surprise," Ian grinned. "Breakfast first, then we'll plant something special." The girls dashed back inside, their excited voices filling the house with an energy that made everything feel more alive. Isadora appeared in the doorway, holding a mug of tea, wearing a simple dress that fluttered in the breeze. There was color in her cheeks, rest in her eyes, nothing like the exhausted, bitter woman he'd first encountered those months ago. "Good morning," she said, stepping forward to help him with the boxes. They worked together, carrying everything to the backyard, where the soil was ready and waiting for new inhabitants that would add color to the small space. After breakfast, the girls joined them in the backyard, now dressed in clothes they could get dirty. Their eyes lit up at the sight of the flowers, tulips, lavender, sunflowers, roses, and so many others, all in tiny, colorful pots. "Today is a special day," Ian announced, kneeling so he was level with the girls. "Each of you will choose a flower that represents something important, something you want to grow not just in the garden, but in yourselves too." The girls exchanged glances, excited and curious about the idea. Isadora watched from the doorway with a gentle smile. Leah, the youngest, was first to decide. She held a pot of yellow tulips with surprising certainty for someone her age. "I want this one," she declared. "And what does it represent for you?" Ian asked. "Trust," she said, after thinking for a moment. "Because when we plant something, we have to trust it will grow, even if we can't see what's happening underground." Ian and Isadora exchanged emotional looks. How could someone so small grasp something so profound? Luna went next, choosing delicate lavender flowers. "Peace," she explained, "because they smell calm, and even when the wind blows, they stay steady." Liz, usually the quietest, approached with a pot of sunflowers. "Hope," she said softly, "because they always look for the sun, even on cloudy days. They know the sun will come back." Lastly, Luma selected a small pot of red roses. "Courage," she said, carefully touching a thorn, "because it has thorns that hurt, but you still want to hold it because it's beautiful, like when we're scared but do it anyway. Ian felt an overwhelming emotion tighten his chest. He glanced at Isadora, whose eyes brimmed with tears, likewise moved by their daughter's wisdom. "Those are perfect choices," he managed to say. "Let's plant them." They worked together in the gentle morning sun. They dug holes in the soft soil, eased each seedling out of its pot, and set them in place. Small hands patted the earth around the roots, watered them gently, and talked to them as though the flowers could hear every word. Ian showed them how to firm the dirt around each plant, the right amount of water, the best position for sunlight. Isadora explained each plant's scientific name, fun facts about their species, and signs that would indicate extra care was needed. It felt natural, as if they had always done this together, parents teaching daughters, a family. When they finished, they sat in the small patio, all dirty and tired, but filled with a sense of accomplishment that went beyond mere gardening. They looked at their transformed backyard, with rows of colorful promises. In a few weeks, those blooms would open, brightening the space and their lives even more. "Doesn't it look like a different place?" Liz asked, admiring the view. "It looks like our place," Luna replied. Ian watched the four girls sitting on the porch step, their hair so alike, blowing in the breeze, their profiles reflecting both his and Isadora's features. He felt a surge of love so intense it almost hurt. Isadora sat next to him on the wooden bench. "Thank you for this," she said quietly, "for all of this." Ian nodded, understanding the weight of those simple words. He glanced around, taking in the scene. The house was modest, needing repairs in many places. The yard was small, cramped between old walls, limited space for all their ambitions. But now, there was something more important than size or appearance. There were roots growing quietly beneath the soil, connecting, strengthening, sustaining. Roots of the newly planted flowers extending through the ground. Metaphorical roots anchoring 6 people who, after so much time apart, finally recognized themselves as a family. Ian looked at Isadora's hands with small scars from life, with dirt under her nails, hands that had raised 4 wonderful children on her own. He felt an urge to cover them with his, to connect physically the way their souls had started to connect. He held back, respecting the time they still needed. Some flowers bloom quickly, others need entire seasons. What mattered was they'd been planted, rooted, cared for. "Mum, Dad, come see," Luma suddenly called out, pointing at a bird that had just landed near Leah's tulips. Ian froze upon hearing Dad, the first time any of them had called him that. He looked at Isadora, who seemed equally surprised, her eyes meeting his in a silent question. He smiled, feeling an all-encompassing joy. Together, they got up to answer their daughter's call. The house was simple, the backyard small, but now there were roots, and from roots, futures grow. Night fell gently over Edinburgh, bringing an unexpected clarity. The sky, free of clouds, was draped in a blanket of stars that seemed painted just for that night, for that moment. The girls, exhausted from a full day of gardening, fell asleep quickly. Luna and Luma in the bunk bed they shared, Leah and Liz in the adjacent room. All lulled by tales of brave princesses Ian had learned to tell so well over the past few months. Ian watched each of them as they slept, marveling at how their small hearts could hold so much love, so much change, so much truth. They had accepted, with the wisdom only children possess, that the stranger who showed up in their lives was, in reality, their father. No further questions, no demands about lost time, just pure joy at finally being complete. He quietly went downstairs, finding Isadora in the kitchen, making 2 mugs of tea. "Are they asleep?" she asked softly. "Like rocks," Ian answered. Luma was still talking about the roses when her eyes closed mid-sentence. Isadora smiled, one of those smiles that had been so rare a few months ago but now appeared regularly. "Shall we sit outside?" she suggested, nodding toward the backyard. "It's too beautiful a night to stay indoors." They stepped outside together, into the small garden they'd transformed. In the gentle moonlight, the newly planted flowers looked almost magical, casting delicate shadows on the stone path. They sat on the wooden bench Ian had built weeks earlier, gazing at the star-filled sky. For a while, they remained silent, not the uncomfortable silence of their first interactions after so many years, but a companionable hush for two people who no longer needed words to fill every gap because their presence was enough. At last, Isadora broke the quiet. With a soft, almost hesitant movement, she reached out and took Ian's hand. "I'm still afraid, Ian," she confessed, voice low but clear in the tranquil night. Ian looked at their joined hands, at Isadora's fingers intertwined with his, a simple gesture that felt huge. "I am too," he admitted, embracing the honesty they'd promised each other since the night he learned of Kaio's deceit. "But I'd rather be scared by your side than be brave alone." Isadora turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight, shimmering with tears not yet shed. "6 years is a long time," she murmured. "People change. We've changed." "Yes," Ian agreed. "But maybe we've changed toward each other, not away." The idea hovered between them like a bright possibility, almost tangible. "What if—" Isadora began, hesitating before summoning the courage to continue. "What if we tried again?" A simple question, laden with all their stories, their sorrows, and their hopes. Ian brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently, feeling the texture of skin he once knew intimately, now rediscovering it as a territory both familiar and new. "Let's build something new," he replied, every word a promise. "With all we've learned," he paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "And with everything we can still become." A tear escaped, sliding down Isadora's cheek. Ian wiped it away with his thumb, his touch as gentle as a blessing. "It won't be easy," she said. "We have 4 daughters to raise, a house to maintain, wounds to heal, and flowers to watch grow," Ian added with a smile. "Trust, peace, hope, and courage." "That sounds like a great start to me." Isadora smiled through her tears, and in that smile, Ian saw the return of something he'd feared was lost forever. The particular light she always brought into his life, which not even lies, time, or distance could truly extinguish. "How will we make this work?" she asked. "Practically speaking, I mean. You have your apartment, your job. We have the girls' routine, school." "One step at a time," Ian answered, holding both her hands now. "But I know I want to be here every day. I want to wake up and see you, see the girls. I want to be around for nightmares, for homework, for scraped knees, for victory smiles. You want to live here?" The question came out almost like a sigh. "If you'll have me," Ian said, "or we can look for a bigger place where each of the girls can have their own space. Or we can stay like this for now, me coming and going, until we figure out what works best for all of us." He grinned. "The important thing isn't the place, Isadora. It's choosing to stay together wherever we are." Isadora smiled, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear, only certainty. "I want you to stay," she said simply. "Here. With us." Amid smiles, tears, and a starry sky, they sealed that promise with a kiss, their first in over 6 years, filled with the sweetness of rediscovery and the depth of what they'd lost and found again. It was a new beginning, a second chance, a conscious choice to build together, not merely pick up where they left off. They chose to give love a new chance, a love stronger now, forged in the trials they'd endured apart, a more mature love, enriched by individual growth each had undergone, a more genuine love, founded not on youthful ideals, but on the complete acceptance of who they were. When they finally went back inside, holding hands like teenagers after a first date, something fundamental had changed in the air around them. The house with the blue door, which for so long had been only a refuge for Isadora and the girls, was beginning to become a true home. Upstairs, 4 girls slept soundly, unaware of the conversation that would change their lives, yet somehow sensing, even in dreams, that something important had fallen into place. Next morning, Ian would be there for breakfast, and the day after, and the next. He would be there to watch the flowers they planted together grow, to witness each small victory, each special moment in his daughters' lives. He would be there to forge new memories, to heal old wounds, to create a future none of them had dared imagine just months before. The family at last was whole. and this time no one was leaving. In the gentle darkness of that spring night, under a sky filled with stars, love had found its place not where it was first born, nor where they'd initially imagined, but where they chose to be together, imperfect, real, and infinitely more precious for it. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.